How many people here think they're going to live to 100?
Yeah.
Yeah? Hands up. Oh, actually, that's good. What about 90? 90? What are you? 85? Yeah. Okay. Self-inflicted, yeah. So let me, let's just take a look at, sorry. Sorry, Lynda. It is there. Yep. Yep, that's it. And here's my clicker. Okay, when I go like this. Okay. So we wrote a book called The 100-Year Life. Do please go to the website. There's masses of stuff there. And there's also a brilliant diagnostic, which we haven't got time to do now. But if you were here for a week, then we would have plenty of time to do that. Okay. So I showed you this earlier, but that really is astounding. And, you know, if you think about what these early gains were, it was basically because kids didn't die. Kids were dying, and then they stopped dying. This was really solving some of the middle-age diseases. None of us here, I hope, will die of a heart attack. And these are now to do with the illnesses of old age. So medical science is moving really, really quickly. That's, for me, when people say, what was the big takeaway from Davos? I mean, obviously, I'm interested in the 100-year life, but there's a lot of doctors hanging around telling you you're going to live forever. So I came away very heartened by that, yeah. Okay, so here's where you are currently, but actually, see, I was born in 1955, and I certainly am not going to die at 87. I'm going to live a lot longer than that. But this is average, so do you see how quickly things are changing? And the point I want to make is, and I made it earlier, is it's not about being older for longer, it's about being younger for longer. And we think this notion of juvenescence is a very important thing. Now, those of you who've got adolescent kids, what is it about 17 and 18-year-olds? I mean, how would you describe them in terms of the way they think about the world? What are they like at 17 or 18? They're fun, lots of activities, they're very connected, prepared to take risks probably, aren't they? So why can't we retain those characteristics? I mean, a bit like Costas was saying earlier. They sleep a lot. Oh, by the way, not this time, but last year when I wrote my Davos blog, my number one takeaway was sleep. 8 hours a night. All the doctors, they all have different things about what you should eat, of course, or whether you should take baby aspirins. No one agrees on that. But they all said... Dominic! It's like this all the time. We can't hear ourselves think over here. Can't hear us. Yeah, he's definitely an adolescent, by the way. No question about that. Okay, so that's the thing, really. What you need to do is not to think about long lives as being old all the time. You want to think about it as being an adolescent all the time. What fun is that? Okay, so the point really, I think, about long lives is about hours. So if you lived to 70, you've got 125,000 productive hours. At 100, you've got 218,000 hours. So the question really is, what are you going to do with those hours? What are you going to do with all those hours? Now, one thing you could be is just like your dad. we call him Jack. He was born in 1945, and this is what Jack had. And really the argument we make in the book is that most of our practices and processes, corporate practices, government practices, are based on Jack. Even though Jack doesn't even exist anymore. You can see we had him dying actually last year. So here we have, the 5 things of Jack's life. Classic family structure. Jack worked full time. Jill looked after the children. Two key transitions. From education to work, from working to retirement. And he did that in lockstep with everyone else. This is a very important thing about the 3-stage life, is that when you make your transitions, you make them with everybody else. So you don't have to think about, what am I going to do next? You just look around to everybody else and say, carry on, I'll just do the same as everybody else. And of course, very, very lucky. Jack was very lucky, because he was in a world of low debt and home ownership. Right. So that meant that he only had to save 4% of his salary, and he could retire at 65. Luckily, he only retired for 8 years. That's very good news for the pension industry. And that actually worked really well. But let's have a look for a moment at Jimmy. Some of you may be more like Jimmy than Jack. Born in 1971. What are we already seeing from people in Jimmy's age group? Well, first of all, Jimmy's wife works. So already we're talking about a much more complex household structure. He's a sandwich, isn't it? He's in a sandwich. I know that. Last weekend, Friday night, I went to see my aged mother. Saturday and Sunday, I'm looking after a 3-year-old grandchild. I am a sandwich. Sandwich between aging parents and grandchildren. And of course, the longer you live, and the longer all your family members live, the more you get sandwiched in between the different generations. More job changes, struggling to save, and also, younger people thinking they can do better than he. Let's move on. So, saving rates, already you can see with Jimmy, push up on saving rates. 17% higher than most of us save. But sort of vaguely okay. He could vaguely still retire at 65. But actually you can see already 2 things happening with this equation, or this balance. First thing is, he has to save quite a lot. Secondly, he's already retired for 20 years. Now let me tell you about the research on retirement. Retirement, and this is what the doctors are telling us, is really bad for you. Really bad for you. In fact, one of the guys that we met last week at Temple, or the week before, was telling me, and I blogged about it afterwards, that every year that you work after the age of 60, you reduce your chances of Alzheimer's by 3%. Work is good. So that's one thing that we have to think about, is that work is good. And that's why, from your perspective, and this is the whole intangible asset argument, you have to focus on building good work. I think what we've done quite a lot in organizations is sort of focused on the bit that goes on the top. The training programs, the learning. Actually, you need to get into work itself and say, is this good? Is this good, interesting work? Okay. And already we're seeing that people like Jimmy are realizing that it's not going to hold out for them. In fact, actually, if you look at the data on entrepreneurship, you'll see that more people are creating jobs creating their own companies after the age of 55 than they are under the age of 25. So what we're seeing already is a focus on building a business. By the way, I think that building your own business, so building a job rather than finding a job, is going to be the new mantra. I think governments are going to push behind it, because there's no way that you will get job creation from multinationals. They're going to push behind it, and hopefully you're going to see much more government support to build your own business. Not so that it's not a sort of multinational business, it's not Google, but actually employs 4 or 5 people, makes a decent profit, and that's something that you can do right the way through your life. I started a company called hotspots movement. Some of you have worked with it, I know, in the past. And I started it about 6 years ago, partly because I want to work forever. And having your own business is a really good way of doing that. Because there's nobody to tell you it's time to go. Although actually, I must say, as an academic, it's the same. We can be here forever. Okay, let's move on. You can see already with Jack some of the lowest life satisfaction stages. So 45 years old, for those of you in that age bracket feeling a bit pissed off, don't worry, everybody is. It's not just you. So you see, it's this marvelous data. We start off here in a great shape, very happy. And then we get, by the time you're my age, look, it's great. You're having a great time again. It's wonderful. Okay, here's Jane. I showed you Jane earlier. Look, two things are really obvious, isn't it, about your young children, your teenagers. The first is, they can't possibly save 25%. I mean, there's nobody going to be able to do that. And secondly, 35 years of retirement? What the hell is she going to do? So the big point really we made in the first book, and we're following it up in the second, which will be out in 2019, is it's the end of what we think of work as we know it. We just can't possibly carry on as we are. This is why I said this morning, or just before, we are in a period of transition. I'm totally convinced of that many of the structures and institutional practices and processes we put in place aren't working. And that's why you're getting all these weird things happening around the world, lots of anxiety. They're not, we have to repurpose. Okay. So, of course, Jane can save at different rates and retire at less, but basically, she's going to be in that sort of area. She's going to be working from anything between 75 and 90, depending on how much she saves and what she wants to live on after she's retired. Now, here's the interesting thing, and this is an argument we began to develop in the 100-Year Life, the book The 100-Year Life, and we're developing more in the next book. And it's this question of hours. So, one thing I'd like you to think about is that working hours have gone down. Now, I know it doesn't feel as if they've gone down for you, because they haven't. They've gone down for pretty much everybody else, apart from highly skilled professionals. So highly skilled professionals now work longer hours than they ever did before. And if we talk to a Victorian about that, they will be absolutely astounded. Because for a Victorian in the 1840s or 50s, the way of demonstrating wealth was to show leisure, to show that you had leisure time. But now all of us are working really hard because we've decided to exchange leisure time for money. That's what we've all decided to do. And I want to basically say, we're just beginning to make the argument, that let's say you had to work X 10,000 of hours in your whole lifetime. Why not distribute that right across your lifetime? This is really the point we're going to make. Why not why not work 6 hours a day? Why not work 4 days a week? Why not take a month off? Why not take a sabbatical? The way we think about time was developed in the factories of the Industrial Revolution. We are 200 years away from that now. Why are we still thinking about the mechanization of a factory as the way that we think about time? And how did we get into this ridiculous idea that if you work longer hours, you're more productive? That's true if you're in a factory. That's true. Somebody who works 10 hours in a factory is going to be more productive than someone who works for 6, because they're actually doing a repetitive task. But for most of us, there is no relationship between the hours we work on our levels of productivity. So we've got to really think again about time. And this is something that we're going to be researching more and more at London Business School. Okay, second thing that's happening is people are already beginning to change the way they think about life. I wrote the book, as I mentioned earlier, with an economist. And one of the economic principles is the principle of options. For an economist, having an option is a very valuable thing. And you see, if you think of your life being short,
Thank you, let's hear it for it. It's the lyrics, the dumb song.
I've got all these noise, I have to work with them all the time. They're like this all the time. So imagine that an option is valuable. If you only have a short life, you don't have much time for the consequences of your choices to be played through. But let's imagine that you're going to live until 100. The option of getting married becomes a very important consequence for you. And that's why you're seeing much later marriages. And already you can see that the age at which people marry has gone down very, very greatly. And by the way, I don't think I've got it as the next slide. Just show the next slide now. Divorce rates are also changing. Now, you might think that divorce rates are going up. They're not. They're going down. The divorce rates are dependent on the age at which you married. Right? So people like me, who married in the 1970s, have the highest divorce rate of any group. That's why when sociologists looked at marriage in the 1970s and the massive level of divorce, they said, it's the end of divorce. Actually, it wasn't. It was just the end of marriage for that group of people. But actually, if you look at young people now, if we plot them right up into their 40s, they have much lower divorce rates. So what we're seeing is people are marrying later, and they're entering into a relationship which is more robust, potentially a great deal more robust. So what's the point in all of this? Well, here's a couple of things that I mentioned earlier, but I want to spend a bit more time on. Firstly, you need to focus on intangible assets. This is really one of the biggest takeaways from our work. And here's some idea of what those intangible assets can be. And I want to go through them in more detail than I did earlier. And if you had time, which you don't, I would ask you to complete the diagnostic. But that's going to take us 8 minutes, and we don't have 8 minutes. So here is what I believe to be intangible assets. Number one is, what is it that could help you to remain productive? Now, intangible assets turn out to be really important because actually having more money helps you to retire. So tangible assets help you to retire, intangible assets help you work longer. Productivity, we think, is about 3 things. Number one, your skill. And that's why I think organizations, your sort of companies, should really be focusing on reskilling and lifelong learning. That has to be a major priority. There's all sorts of technologies now that will help you to do that, but that's got the continual investment in skills and knowledge has got to be the number one. Number 2, and this for those of you who are interested in social capital, this is part of the whole social capital argument. And it goes something like this, that actually relationships are very important to intangible assets, and they work on every single intangible asset I'm going to mention to you. This one is peers. So if you want to be really good at your job, much of the high value knowledge in your job is created through tacit knowledge. It's not the stuff you can read from a book, it's the stuff that you learn in one-to-one relationships, as a mentor, as a coach, as a boss, whatever it is. And so the way that you develop your network, particularly around peer groups who can help you to get better, turns out to be really important. The third is reputation. You know, for Jack, all that Jack had to say was, I work for General Electric. He didn't have to say, I'm Jack, these are my badges. He just had to say General Electric, and everyone said, got it. That credentialized him. But actually, your employees are now wanting to have their own reputation. This is why they're putting the badges, as it were, at a premium, because they want you to give them something that they can then take to another job or to another company. So you'll see a big emphasis in terms of learning and developing in actually industry standards that help people demonstrate that they've learned something. Okay, those are my three. By the way, please, sorry, this is a conversation, it's not me just rabbiting on. So any points or comments at any point, please just, yeah.
Yeah, I did have one a minute ago, which is about the correlation with hours around relationships in order to get to productivity, in order to get to speed of innovation.
Yeah.
If I think about the couple of hours in work for us at the moment, it's about wanting to develop the culture of the organisation.
Yeah.
So we're trying to move to more agile working, and at the same time are conscious of the cost of the loss of connectivity.
Yeah, and this is a really important point actually, because if you have everybody working flexibly, they're not together enough. And I think Facebook made exactly that point, didn't they, when they brought them all back into the office again. So that's something that you've got to think through. And I think one of the interesting things about this transitional phase we're in is that it requires quite a lot of thinking. So I absolutely, so people went straight for flexible working and then realised that everybody took Monday and Friday off. So the office was empty, and then, sometimes they left at 4, and so obviously none of this was going to work. So you have to find a more negotiated way around making these times work. Okay, the second intangible asset is vitality, and actually it's just what you imagine it would be in terms of health. Where are we with health? Every single person in this room knows what you've got to do to be healthy, haven't we? You may decide not to do it, or not to do it very often, but we pretty much all know what we have to do to be healthy. So the question is, are you doing any of those things? But the second two are rather more interesting, probably, in terms of vitality. The second one is about your relationship with work, and particularly stress. So how do you manage, the balance between working and your family and your home? How much emotional baggage is there that moves from one to another? The third comes right back to social capital. It's social capital again. So if you take a look at research on people throughout their life in terms of their happiness and their satisfaction, what's the number one predictor? Friends. And actually, when I get my MBA students to do the diagnostic, which I hope you'll do, and what comes out really interestingly is that they already realise they're not investing in friendships. And the interesting difference between tangible and intangible assets is tangible assets can be bought and sold at any point in time. Tomorrow I can sell my house in Primrose Hill and buy another house somewhere else. Intangible assets cannot be bought and sold. And one of the things I say to my MBA students is, I could be a billionaire now and not have something that's incredibly valuable to my well-being, which is a 50-year-old friendship. So, in fact, I should have a photo of this. I have a friend, Shirley. We met each other when we were 10 years old at school. We still see each other, even though she went to the States and then came back. That research would show is really important to my well-being, and you can't magic it. A billionaire can't say, I want to have 5 50-year-old friendships. That's the point. Quite a lot of intangible assets are accumulative. You can't just suddenly decide you want it. And that's why planning becomes so much more important. And really, the big issue for our students is, how do you plan for this? And then finally, this is a very fascinating one, because when you think about Jack's life, Jack didn't have to make any transitions, really. Going from school to work and work to retirement, they weren't transitions. They were just social events that he went with many others. But now imagine your life, or your kid's life, where actually you're going to be doing different things, you're going to go out to be educated, you might start your own business, you might build a portfolio. That immediately means you have to make transitions on your own, with nobody else to help you. What do we know about transitions? Actually, I'm a psychologist, and those of you in the room who are psychologists know, we know a lot about transitions. They're very difficult, they're very painful, and they require you to let go of who you are and to get really anxious and then find yourself again. And there's two attributes that help on that. The first is how much you know yourself. And the second, which again is social capital, is about your networks. So here's the thing. If you have homogenous networks, i.e. you spend all your time with people just like you, same gender, same age, doing the same sort of work, same education level, same nationality, you will never change. Why? Because actually you're completely enmeshed with people who are so like you. Nobody wants to change. Change is very uncomfortable. So nobody wants the person to change, because if you change, my God, I'm going to have to change. So if you look at people who make transitions, one of the ways they do it is they have diverse networks. So they have people in their networks who aren't like them that they can look at and say, you know, I could be like that person. I'll tell you who's really important for me at the moment, because people have said to me, well, what effect has writing the book had on you? Well, one of the effects it's had is that I've had to move my idea about being productive from 70 to 80. That's what I've done in my mind. One of my great friends is Charles Handy. Some of you may know Charles. He's 84 years old. I'm going to write about him actually in the next book. And I watched Charles really, really carefully. He's not the same as me. He's older than I am. We are similar in many ways, but he's not the same. He's a different age. And that's been a hugely important relationship for me to help me understand how he's navigated being a productive 85-year-old. So these sort of diverse networks aren't easy. Much easier to spend all your time with people just like you, but it's a mistake to do that. And you need to build diversity. Okay, so at any one time, you're going to be basically doing one of these three things. With all of those asset classes, you're either going to be depleting them, which you can do. I mean, you can deplete your energy. You can deplete your skills, but the thing is, you can't do it for that much, for that long. There's quite a lot of disagreement about how long you can deplete before you build again. And some people say, oh, you can build your health very quickly. Others say, oh, you can build networks very quickly. And I don't think that's true. And certainly what came out of the study of aging that people have done, that shows that if you're not healthy going into your 70s, it's very difficult to really, keep your health until you're in your 90s. That seems to be like a bit of a stop, really, that you've really got to sort yourself out. So you could be depleting, you could be simply maintaining, or you could actively be building. And building intangible assets really is about the amount of hours you decide to spend on something. Are you going to spend time with that friend? Are you going to spend time building your diverse networks? Are you going to go to the gym? All the things that actually take time, you have to start thinking about whether or not you're doing that. Okay, so let me, any questions at this stage? Because I know we're probably getting to near 4 o'clock, aren't we? Are we? I don't know, I've got my...
9 minutes.
Oh, good, okay. 9 minutes. Questions, observations before I move on to the final point. Yeah, Annie.
In the workplace,
Yeah.
you kind of find typical workplaces it's getting younger, not older. I work in professional services, I'm interim, I'm freelance, I've made life choices, trying to
Yeah.
things. I don't want to live to 100, so I don't want to work to 90. I want to do other things, but I kind of notice more and more the generation getting younger and younger.
Well, professional service funds are the worst.
Yeah.
They're absolutely the worst. And by the way, you probably don't know this yet. I know it. You probably don't. Is there are massive court cases coming up with professional service funds. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, they're going to be done. They're absolutely.
Yeah.
And I've said publicly that I think that ageism is worse than sexism. I mean, it's ridiculous. So I think professional service funds are the worst. There's been a whole sort of, focus on millennials. It's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. So they have to change, and professional services will be sued. One of them's being sued right now in a class act in the States, which you haven't heard about. It's been kept under wraps. They contacted me about it. It's going to be big. And it will stop them doing what they're doing now, which is saying, you're 55, we'd like you to leave. Because it's just a ridiculous stereotype. Any other comments or observations about intangibles? Yeah.
Well, it is more intangible. It's actually how you make this workplace work for those people who want to stay in a more flexible way.
Yeah.
And I don't know if anybody else is facing this. The big restriction is our traditional systems we've got in place.
Yeah.
Like the full-time equivalent,
Yeah.
the way we quote to our heads, the way we create job descriptions.
Yeah.
So, you know, the benefits team are saying to me, brilliant, I'd love to do this. This is absolutely fantastic. You talk to the line managers, how am I going to make that work?
Yeah, no, so this is what's difficult. So this is why we're in a transition, isn't it?
Yeah, we want to shake things up. Do we create different pilots? Do we work
pilots.
with different contracts and stuff like how we work win-win?
Yeah, you need pilots. In fact, actually, British Telecom, we've 20 years ago, I wrote a case on BT and their use of flexible working, and it was all pilots. So they ran a series of pilots. They found, for example, the first pilot, everybody took Monday and Friday. So, you know, they learned, and that's what you've got to do, because in a transition that we're in, nobody knows what the right thing is for your business. You've got to learn, and the only way you learn is through experimentation. And you've got to be prepared to experiment, but also do a proper experiment, baseline data. So, for example, when BT brought in flexible working, what they found is, as they measured productivity went right down. It had a really bad effect on productivity for all the reasons you've said. But actually, over time, they found that once people realised how to do it, how to make it work, and it basically it went back to team-based negotiation. Then they found productivity increased, and then it accelerated. But they had to run a proper experiment to persuade people that that was the right thing. So I would say right now, we're in an experimental stage, and I would experiment with doing different things. I think job share is a great idea, and I know nobody uses it, but that seems to me like a fantastic idea, where two people negotiate between each other about how to do one of these big jobs. Yeah.
No, if it's a very company, you just need to trust people that they will try to find the right way to make it work.
Yeah.
And this also changes the role of the manager. So what I see is that managers are really concerned because they cannot use the same measures they use now to assess their people, like to assess productivity, to make process work, etc.
Yeah, I agree. So we have to rethink work really. And to be honest, I think it's time. I wrote 20 years ago, I wrote a book. Well, just saying we need to rethink work, and it amazes me that we haven't done that. It's been so difficult for us to do that. But we have to do it. And I think that the reason we've made such a push on the 100-year life is I just think it's a really good catalyst. It really catalyses those conversations. That also says to guys, if you're going to live to 100 years, wouldn't you want to spend time with your kids when they were young? You know, because the reason why guys didn't is that they had a very short window in which to run as fast as they could. Now we say, gosh, you're going to be working till you're 80. Okay, well, and once men stop taking time off to look after children, then the game is, I mean, that's perfect really, because then it becomes a human thing and not a woman thing. And I've always felt that actually, that the caring of children should be a human thing, not associated necessarily with either gender. Okay, let me just finish by saying one final point before we break up. And that's about the 3 stages. You know, it was interesting because Andrew and I've never written before with anybody, and we just had so much fun writing together. He's an economist, I'm a psychologist. We come from completely different backgrounds. But as we began to write the book, and then as we've talked about it, because it came out in June, so we've talked all over the world about it, what we began to realise is the 2 big takeaways. In fact, we've just submitted something for MIT Sloan that you'll read in a month or two's time, was intangible assets and the end of the 3-stage life. This is really it. You know, these are the 2 big takeaways. And the big takeaway about the 3-stage life is everything that we do is currently based on 3 stages. Full-time education, full-time work, full-time retirement. And that is not going to hold. It isn't holding already, but it certainly can't hold. And so what might happen? Well, firstly is more transformations, more transitions, and more experiments. I noticed that. I noticed with the young people that I know, well, even myself, I mean, as I said earlier, I'm getting married again. I mean, how ridiculous is that? But actually, you do sort of, it seems, these social, and then I'm dealing with stepchildren and step-grandchildren, money, these are social experiments. I couldn't say to my mum, how do you do it, mum? Because she didn't get married again at 63. So she has no idea how to do it. So, all of us are experimenting, and that's how it should be right now. We need to have, if you look at periods of intense change, you need lots of experiments. I think you need to emphasize intangible assets. We're building, by the way, and happy to talk to anyone, in fact, we're just trialing it very soon. We have built a diagnostic that you use with employees to try and push the conversation to intangible assets. So we've got a whole diagnostic that we're using. If anyone's interested, please just drop me a note or give me your card, and we'll share with you what we're doing. But I think you need measures of intangible assets. You need to know, are we building, maintaining, or depleting our intangible assets in our organisation right now? Because that becomes something that you can talk to employees about. And of course, big changes in families and home. So what's going to come in the place of all of this? Well, one way of thinking about it would be actually, to imagine that these are building or depleting. At any point in time, we actually get our students to imagine their life. We ask them to do a timeline from their current age to 100 and say, what do you think you're going to do in your life? And here's some of the things that we talk about. These are the new stages. There have been new stages emerge before, in life. Teenagers, retirees, those were both new stages. If you look at Victorian England, it didn't have teenagers. It had children and it had adults. It certainly didn't have retirees. So what are some of the big stages we think are going to start emerging? Here's 4 ideas. Number 1, the explorer. It's not, it is your gap year kid, but it's you as well. If you want to build diverse networks, the best possible way of doing that is to get out, take 6 months out, and do something different. And if I'm now telling you you're going to work till 80, why don't you do that? Why aren't we all doing that? And why is organisations finding it so hard to bring people back? This is why mid-career hires are so important. You've just got to think more about that. Oh my God, we're running out of time, aren't we? 1 more minute. Okay, number 2. I said earlier, massive problem with destruction of jobs by technology. I can't underestimate that to you. It's really, the latest data gets just more and more terrifying. However, the very technology that's destroying jobs is also creating platforms that allow people to build jobs. So that little company I've got, the Hotspots movement, joins 45 companies around the world on a platform to talk about the future of work. It's built a platform that allows 10,000 people to talk. But there's only, it's just me and a few kids in a room in Somerset House. And that's what you all should be doing. We should all be building a business. At some stage in our life, we need to become independent producers. And this is to do with the mechanization of work. We've always thought we had to find a job. Why don't we think more about building a job? Thirdly, it's what Charles Handler used to talk about in terms of the portfolio, wasn't it? Why can't we, and it's not just for the over 70s, why can't each one of us do different things in our lives? Sometimes about learning, sometimes about doing something, giving something back. And of course that all means lots of transitions. So let me just finish by saying, you have an opportunity now to design your own life. Your parents didn't have it. We're the first generation that can actually design our own life, and your employees can do that the same. Your kids can do it. It's the best gift you can give anybody right now, the opportunity to design their own life. Thank you very much.